So our first talk is Professor Lynne Coventry. She's the director of the Cyber Quarter. The Cyber Quarter, you might explain, but it's based in a building across the road, does lots of digital cybersecurity stuff, interesting things. And this is her talk. I'm going to let her go for it, but it sounds so exciting. I just want you to get straight into it.
Okay, great. Hello. Thank you, everybody. Sorry, I have two things to admit to. One, I've got ADHD and hadn't quite finished this because, you know, I needed the adrenaline to be just on time. And then I started off without my glasses, so I couldn't finish this morning. So it might be a bit of a mess, but that's just me. In terms of the Cyber Quarter, for those who are interested, this was funded by the Scottish Government and Tay Cities to bring academia and industry closer together to discuss cybersecurity challenges and basically to help feed some of our research directly into industry and get some impact and changes as a result of it. What I wanted to talk to you today about was human elements of trust and data misuse in open maps, but I'll give you a bit of context as to why that's of interest. But first of all, in getting ready for this talk, I was looking at one of your discussion boards, which was about cyber attacks in OSM and vandalism, and it was referring to a piece of vandalism. And I wanted to go back to the beginning of malware, and that was very similar. It was one friend to another friend sending a piece of text just to prove they could. And all it said was, "I'm the creeper, catch me if you can." However, from that, the person who was sent this decided to create a piece of software which self-replicated to delete that creeper message. So it was called the Reaper. So the creeper was the first worm, if anybody knows cybersecurity terms, and the Reaper was the first self-replicating malware that could spread through everybody's computers. What started off as a joke has become a major issue in computing and connected devices. So similarly, I'm seeing lots of debates about vandalism and is it really a cyber attack? And what I'd like to say is, who cares about the semantics? There is something has happened. What seems trivial is only going to get bigger. Now, I'm not going to say you can completely secure your maps. There's no such thing as 100% security. The only way you're going to make a map or a piece of technology secure, well, are you ever? So this was something that came up years ago. The only truly secure computer is one that basically there is no user. The minute you have a user, you don't have security. But then it's not just about the users. Then people start, well, it doesn't need it matter if it's got a user, if it's connected. So then your computer needs to be unplugged, switched off. But maybe that's not secure enough. So maybe we need to put it in a titanium box that nobody can get through. Maybe that needs to be in a bunker. Maybe that bunker needs to be buried. Maybe somebody can still get in that. So if there is any human attackers coming into this, we need nerve gas around it. And so and so. But what we don't want is an arms race. This is about accepting risk. There is risk. Things will happen. But it's how prepared are you to deal with that. Just some context. I'm not a technologist anymore. I started off as a technologist, but I was always always more interested in the interaction between humans and technology. So I've always been at the interface level. And so this talk's coming very much from a human aspects perspective. It's not just about the tech anymore. We need a holistic solution. We need a holistic approach to cybersecurity. And particularly at the interaction points. That can be interactions between different technologies, but also interactions with humans. The other thing that's happening in cybersecurity as more people get involved with human aspects is the term is expanding. So what counts as a cybersecurity issue? So we're seeing more researchers and more interest in merging disinformation and misinformation into being part of the cybersecurity landscape. And we're also this sort of blurred boundary between cybersecurity and cyber safety. So cybersecurity is normally about the protection of devices, your assets, your critical infrastructure, your information, and cyber safety is about the safeness and the security of humans in the world. As I've said before, you can't have total security, but you have this unique balance between privacy and openness. And total privacy is not healthy, and it's not possible. We can't exist in the world with total privacy. But total openness is also harmful. If I hear one more 5-year-old child saying something nasty and then just saying, but I'm just being honest, I'm just telling the truth. And it's, you know, sometimes we have to hide things, and there's reasons why we hide things from others. You're in this unique position with OpenMaps that everybody has a key. So you're not talking about, there will be some external threats, but your biggest problem is potentially insider threats. Your users, your mappers, you know, anybody in the world, I'm assuming, can sign up and start adding to your maps. So how are you going to deal with insider threat? These maps, you know, they're no longer just about the landscapes. People use them in different ways. And what I'd like you to think about is potential unintended harms from maps or from apps that use maps. And I think what's important to note is you will be breached, there will be issues. Those, if you haven't yet, you're kidding yourself if you think you won't be. But it's about being ready and about knowing how to recover from them, whether you can. But fundamentally underpinning all of our interactions online is trust. Has been from the start. There's no way that everything is completely validated by everybody. At some point, we just have to trust in the system. And as such, as mappers, you have great responsibility, because people will just trust maps, to ensure that they are trustworthy. So what I did is, as anybody does, all our students do this way. I got given a question, so I started with AI. And I proposed to AI, are open maps trustworthy? And I asked them to give me an answer from different perspectives. So from a cynical chief financial officer, from a jaded end user who's had some bad experience, from a social ethnicist who's worried about the social consequences of maps, and from a scientist who's demanding the evidence. And it was quite interesting to see their answers and whether or not we were right to place our trust in open maps. Now, I'm not saying these are right or anything, it just was quite a fun activity to start with. But there is a fundamental in terms of human psychology, and this underlying belief that maps are trustworthy and that they shouldn't be doubted. And I'm sure there's nothing that I say to you or any of the examples I give that you don't know, because you're well embedded into the mapper world. I'm not. But what I'd like you to get out of this talk is just to reflect a bit on the consequences and what you might want to do differently. So in other words, maps are saying to us, just trust me. And the human brain is wired to trust and believe visual information more than audio or textual information. Visual information is very persuasive, and maps are very persuasive. Maps, the way we visually represent information, makes information more comprehensible. It makes it easier to understand and easier to memorize. But it also creates emotional connections. It evokes feelings. Once we've got that emotional connection, that aids our memorability, but it also engages engagement. So maps and visual information are a good way to capture attention and keep attention. But can we really trust maps? And from the sort of 80s, 90s, one of the sociologists asked us to think carefully about whether or not maps were trustworthy. And he started to deconstruct the neutrality of maps and whether or not they were neutral, unbiased ways of communicating. But we're seeing maps increasingly used as a way of persuading people into a particular way of thinking. And this has become more problematic in our interconnected world. Social media make maps go viral very quickly. So misinformation can be spread around the world very quickly. And we're seeing more use of deepfake geography. And it's a way of telling really convincing stories, but doing it with false data. One example of that was this map, which I'm sure you're familiar with, which said that it was how COVID had spread from the Wuhan region in China. And I'm sure you know what it really is. Yeah, so what it is air routes. And so they've just used data, they've used a map. It looks convincing. Everybody believed it at the time until a GIS specialist pointed out that that's where it was. But it told the story convincingly. The other one is this satellite image of Australian bushfires. It convinced everybody that Australia was devastated. You know, Australia's burning. In reality, if Australia was burning like that, you wouldn't be able to see the fires from a satellite. All you would see was smoke. But again, in news, etc., very way of convincing people that bushfires were a real issue. What it is an amalgamation of data over a number of years showing where there had been bushfires in Australia, and it's just a visual representation of that on a map. It's not new. Deliberate non-mapping, deliberate use of is not a new thing, so fake maps aren't new. We've been doing this since we started exploring the world. So Drake and Cook, you can go and see Discovery down on the quay here. They were instructed by their governments to deliberately mismap. And so, you know, the idea that maps are truth has long not been the case. And I mentioned vandalism. You're seeing vandalism in your maps. These can be for a variety of reasons. So it can be political idealists, and apologies to any Jews in the room. This is not a political statement. It's just an example of what was done to a map. It can be idealist acts. It can be for commercial benefits. It can be to mark copyright, to prove it was you. Let's just put in something that's wrong to prove it was you. And I did have another example of vandalism, but I've forgotten what it was. I can't read my notes. So anyway, vandalism is occurring, and it makes these maps less trustworthy. I didn't know that cartographers mapped fake places on maps, just to show it. And what you're going to see more and more, I'm assuming, is AI being a threat in this place, because what AI will do is take a number of maps over a number of years, and if you ask it to draw a map, it's going to merge those maps, and suddenly either places that existed years ago and no longer exist are going to appear back on the map, or they're just going to imagine some place based on the rules that they've been given. So just as in academia, we see these hallucinatory references, which you think, that must have been harder than just going and finding the real reference. The way they're coded will mean that they will put 2 and 2 together and get 5. So there is this taxonomy for misinformation. So misinformation may be deliberate, and there may be reasons for it, or it could be by accident. But Claire Waddle came up with this taxonomy from looking at different maps around at the time. And she came up with the reasons that these different maps had been created. So a satirical map might be used for propaganda. Again, using the image of the map to put forward a political point of view. There may be false connections have been made. Those may be by accident or they may be deliberate. They may deliberately mislead, etc. So there's lots of different ways that misinformation has found its way into maps. Again, an old thing, but a new thing. Imposter maps, treasure maps. Again, been going on since we've been exploring. Everybody loves a treasure map. But last year in Turkey, we saw fake treasure maps getting sold by scammers. And they made about £1.5 million out of selling fake treasure maps. But it wasn't just in the map. They had a whole system behind them where if you actually went, you would find an artifact. You would be told the map had told you to contact this person who would verify that it was real and who would offer to negotiate a sales for you for a percentage, but you had to give that percentage up front. So anyway, maps being used for illegal purposes still exists. And that was just a little cartoon to say, this might move into the virtual world as people search for cryptography and try to find which machines are hiding crypto. And the other way maps can be harmful, I mentioned privacy, and I mentioned too much privacy being harmful, but also too little privacy is harmful. And I'm sure you're aware of some of the apps using maps who have accidentally disclosed information. So just like in the old maps, they were asked to hide things. Today, military and sensitive places are hidden. But then you have Strava using their fitness watches and users of Strava mapping out where they're running. And then suddenly in bright lights is military sites around the world. This also happened with phone data as well before fitness data, once military personnel were allowed to take phones on exercises with them. But, accidentally information has been disclosed. This is in a military world, but it can also happen in a domestic abuse world when apps have not put privacy first, and somebody may, choose to put their map of where they're running on social media, but that displays where they might run to a stalker, or even in a domestic abuse situation, it tells their partner where they're going. So in a lot of cases, when I start to talk about this to people, they say it never happened to us and nobody would do this. So, I've done some work in hospitals where nobody believed that anybody would hack into a pacemaker and change the frequency and on that, or would hack into an insulin pump and change the insulin, what people do. And so in maps, I thought, why would somebody add misinformation to a map? We've talked about hostile states might do this to misdirect, but they also might use the information, so you've got a double problem, because they could use your information to find things out, as well as using misinformation to weaponize a map against somebody. Social media users may modify a map because it's fun and it goes viral quickly. But you also have amateurs, so your new mappers may inadvertently bring in misinformation, may bring in errors. Businesses may deliberately falsify a map to make it look like they've got better coverage than they have. Political groups can use it to spread misinformation. We've talked about the fake places to mark ownership, explorers hiding their strategic landmarks, defense hiding, and AI hallucinations. So, loads of ways that misinformation can find its way onto a map. Switching over to security, there is a technical side to that. I don't tend to deal with the technical side, but I thought it was useful to put it in. In terms of security, there's 5 pillars: authenticity, integrity, confidentiality, availability, and non-repudiation. Authentication often refers to authenticating the user, but it also means authenticating the information as well that has been put onto the map. Integrity relates to that in a way, in that is the data reliable, is it accurate, and is it consistent? Confidentiality, does the map keep secret what it should keep secret? Availability, and we'll talk about, so is the map, if this is an essential resource, is it always available? And non-repudiation, a strange term, which is that you can't say you didn't do it, basically. So you know who did it, and they can't claim they didn't. So you've got some way of knowing who did what on a map. The key threats. So I've said before, insider threats. Don't think because everybody can be an insider that means you can't be cyber attacked. Data integrity attacks, where your data is deliberately poisoned, either by insiders or outsiders. Open source intelligence exploitation. So that's the dual use. As cybersecurity, we're always getting this dual use thrown at us. So can it be used against us? So you might be doing something for good, but it's always useful to think, can it be used against somebody? Denial of service attacks, if somebody launches lots and lots of traffic onto your site so that your site goes down, how will you recover? Malware, malware can poison your data. Malware can lead to ransomware, where your maps are encrypted and you have to pay the ransom to get them opened again. Supply chain attacks, so if one map is infected, anybody who uses that map can become infected and it can spread along your supply chain. And there can also be vulnerabilities in your underlying infrastructure, where your maps are stored, has it been patched, is it updated, etc. So is the underlying infrastructure strong? There's lots of measures, technical measures that I'm not going to go into. But in terms of data integrity, I'm sure you've got things in place, but thinking about community reviews, how you review, how much a new user can do the first time they're on a map, how easily you can undo any mistakes. But my point today is really to ask you to think, have you got a strategy in place? Have you thought about all these things? And have you got a recovery plan? And have you played out these scenarios to know that you can act in real time? And in conclusion, I think my biggest takeaway is probably to think before you trust. Maps are powerful tools, as I've said, and I'm sure you're all aware of that. It's very easy for them to go viral. End users won't verify, no matter how much I try to tell somebody to think before they trust. They won't. They won't verify. And they can put themselves in very vulnerable situations because they won't have anything but that map in a particular situation. But as map creators, you need to ensure the data security and the data integrity and be prepared and plan for disruption and potential harms. And as users, I ask people to think about just how easily it is to be persuaded by the power of images, and to think through, to see if there is a way that they can validate, to critique the map rather than just blindly trust it. And yeah, that's probably me for just now. Thank you.